Hi, I'm James McGuire, and today we're talking about what advice does the advisor give? The advisor in this sense is Bernard Golden, Executive Technical Advisor at VMware, dubbed by Wired Magazine as one of the 10 most influential people in cloud computing, and author of Amazon Web Services for Dummies, among other tomes. Bernard, good to have you with us today.
Hey, thanks so much for inviting me. I really look forward to our conversation.
It's interesting. I was thinking about you and I have known each other for a number of years, and I would have guessed back several of those years ago. Let's go back to say 2012. That there's all this sense, there's this thing coming up called cloud. It's getting really big, and if we would have thought to ourselves, look way out to the year 2021, certainly cloud would have displaced data center by now. And yet it seems like data centers very much here. Obviously, cloud is getting bigger every year, but the data center has not gone away. What's up with that? And when is the data center going to finally exit stage left?
Yeah. Well, I think your intuition, in a sense, is correct. I think there isn't net new growth to data centers. I think, the long-term trend is reduction in data centers, square footage.
Yeah.
Um, and, the thing is, these are big assets that are carried on corporate books. And most companies can't afford to just go, well, I'll just write that off.
Right.
I think
Right.
it's not as great as it could be, or not as great as something else. But we'll just, I mean, it just doesn't work from an accounting perspective. And so, it's funny. I think of it kind of like real estate. If you talk to people who are involved in real estate, they'll say what
Mhm.
drives real estate transactions is what they call life events.
Hmm.
Somebody,
Mhm.
household formation. Somebody gets married. They have a child.
Mhm.
They need a bigger place.
Right.
They move, whatever. And in a sense, data center life events are the same sort of thing. Maybe a large portion of your applications roll off of supported hardware and you've got to do something with them. What should you do?
Mhm.
Maybe your lease has come up on the data center, or maybe you're at a place where you've got to do a significant refresh of the entire infrastructure.
Mhm.
And those are the kinds of things that cause companies to go, a couple of years out before that event. They go, what are we going to do? What's the right path forward?
Mhm.
Also, I think what's happened, and this is, I think, understood but not as much remarked on, is many companies have looked at this and gone, you know what? We're a great lodging company. We're a great entertainment company. We're a great
Right.
manufacturer. We're not a great data center operator.
Right.
And so many of them are, one, they'll choose to deploy applications into public cloud environments, but also they may say, I'm going to move out of my data center but move into a co-location facility managed by a data center specialist.
Right.
And so the net square footage of corporate environments, I think, is on a long-term decline.
Uh-huh.
And it may be that the total data center footage is on a long-term decline, even when you account for some of that's being displaced into colo environments.
Right.
So maybe a bit long-winded to say, oh, and so life events are driving that. And of
Right.
course, there's inertia. You know,
Yeah.
to move
Right.
out of a data center is a boatload of work. It's not a trivial task.
Mhm.
And, there's a very human tendency to kind of go, isn't it going to be good for another year? Can't
Sure.
we just leave this?
We spent all this money on this. Can't we just like keep it going for a while? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
So I guess it's interesting, how that idea ties into this other idea I've been thinking about a lot, which is the idea of complexity. It's really struck me like the last year or a couple of years, the level of complexity in enterprise AT seems like it has gone up exponentially. I mean, we have, of course, virtual machines and containers, and we have, OpenShift, which is a platform as a service, a hybrid cloud platform, which might interoperate with, Tanzu, which is a virtualization tool set on top of a virtualization, excuse me, it's a Kubernetes tool set on top of a virtualization platform. And then the microservices, there's multi-cloud. It's just certainly gotten a lot more complex. Does it seem so to you?
yeah, I think it's a fair statement that the general sort of complexity of tech has increased and increased significantly. And really, a lot of that is driven by the kind of nature of tech and the kinds of applications that people are building.
Mhm.
And I sort of summarize it as, in the past, IT, the job was support the business. Our main business is running retail stores. Our main business is putting salespeople out to sell insurance policies. Our main
Right.
business is this. You keep track of it. We'll send the invoices out from it, where we'll take the. So it was support the business. Today, the role of tech in most businesses is becoming run the business. This is the
Enable the
way we do
business. Yeah.
business.
Mhm.
I mean, who is going to call up an insurance agent and say, could you go research some policies for me? You just say, I'll go do it online, or whatever
Right.
it might be. And of course, the pandemic has been a huge forcing function for changes in retail practices. And so those kinds of applications, by their very nature, they have more stringent requirements. They have the kinds of things that are expected of them. So, most companies, we do the same number of invoices every month, roughly speaking, pretty
Mhm.
similar. If you're now a company like a big retailer, it's like, oh, all of a sudden, a huge portion of our sales is going to go through retail, through online,
Yeah.
or the nature of that demand is going to shift, so that you've got there's many more elements to the way your applications operate that require things like, oh, I need it to be able to scale up a lot or scale down, because I can't count on it being roughly similar amount of traffic. So
Sure.
the conditions that they operate within have changed, become more complex, more
Mhm.
demanding, which means the applications and the environments need to be able to support that. And then the infrastructure underneath that needs to be a foundation that can work within those kinds of demands.
Mhm.
So yes, it is a more complex world for tech, no doubt about it.
Yeah. I think I find it to be astounding, actually. So, all right. So, speaking of complexity and people needing advice, there you are out in the service, out in the field, giving service to very executives. You're a technical advisor. What sort of advice are people asking for again and again? What morsels of wisdom and guidance are you giving to say, people who are using VMware?
Well, let me start by saying, I should say that Tanzu is more than a Kubernetes management. It's actually a family of products that not only does VMware distribute a Kubernetes distribution, but it can manage other ones. So you can manage, um, you know, uh, Elastic Kubernetes Service and so forth.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
the reason I mention that is not just to say, by the way, you should know about Tanzu,
Sure.
but to say that the kinds of things that we encounter when we talk to senior executives and users is they're thinking about, how do I transform my application practices to accelerate so I can operate at sort of cloud native speeds, right? Because if you're an insurance company, okay, you used to have agents who would answer phones or a call center. Now people want to self-service. They're gonna compare you to the born in the cloud insurance companies. You've
Right.
got to be that capable. You've got to be able to improve. You've got to be able to respond as fast
Mhm.
as those do. So they say, how do I build application practices that can operate like that? Um, what kinds of things do I need to change from the way I've always done things to
Mhm.
that? So let's talk about kind of the way we work, kinds of
Sure.
interactions we have. We typically start with what is your overall company strategy? And then how does your technology strategy integrate with that and support it? Because again, this is this new world that's cloud native, that is run the business. So, you can't decide what to run until you look at the corporate strategy.
Hmm.
And so we sort of start with, okay, what's the corporate strategy that's driving your technology strategy? So we work with senior executives to kind of identify that. Then identify a cascade of, oh, that might mean needing to be able to stand up data analytics capabilities or machine learning.
Mhm.
Um, we then typically look at things like we'll do what we call a portfolio analysis,
Mhm.
because as I
Okay.
said, the companies already have many applications existing that are typically written for that older, more stable, more static world. And now they've got all this new cloud native things they need to do. So there's a question of, well, of all these applications in the portfolio, which ones need to be engineered like cloud native? Which ones can I leave undisturbed? Which one should I
Legacy.
say, why am I managing this? I'm going to go find a SaaS alternative. A classic is email.
Right.
I always say friends don't let friends run email systems because it's kind of, it's important. You should go to a specialist. So
Sure.
there's a number of different sorts of things. Do you re-platform? Do you redesign? Do you rehost? Whatever it might be. That's one kind of tool that we commonly apply. And that way, that enables our customers, the companies we are working with, to sort of say, I'm going to focus my attention about transformation into this pool of applications. And that's where I'm going to build these new practices. These I'm going to, maybe I'm going to move them out of my data center and I want to move them to a colo, or maybe I want to move them onto AWS or Azure.
Right.
And VMware has a product called VMC, VMware Cloud, that basically replicates a VMware environment running in AWS or running in Azure or running in
Sure.
Google.
Very,
So
very
that,
commonly used.
so you can take an application and not touch it and yet move it into a different environment out of your data center.
Mhm.
We often look at what we call a path to production, excuse me, as another tool. A path to production is basically a value stream analysis, value stream metric of what does it take to get a code change from the moment a developer's fingers finish typing it and check it into code to where it's actually running in a production environment. What are all the stages? What are all the steps? Who are all the touch points? What are the kinds of things that get done? With the notion of saying the more you streamline that, the faster you're going to move toward cloud native practices. And many times, somewhat surprisingly, companies have never really analyzed that. They just have a set of practices that just are. And so we go in and run a series of exercises and workshops over a several week period to kind of say, okay, what are all the steps? What needs to get done manually? What can be automated? What would you do if you wanted to automate them? And so that's another tool. So the business to technology strategy, the portfolio analysis, the path to production, and then there's commonly other kinds of things that you might call meta or Uber, which are, what's your workforce strategy? What is your, transformation of that, how skills development, and so forth. And those are the kinds of things we work with. The Tanzu Value Advisors work with our customers to achieve.
So if you when you're out there talking to executives, are there some common problems that tend to come up again and again? Things you find yourself helping people with, or things you find yourself explaining again and again? So some common challenges.
Well, I mean, it's no what's the word? No coincidence that the kinds of things that I just outlined is what we do. They address the common kinds of challenges or problems that organizations face. So,
Gotcha.
commonly they'll say, I need to do a bunch of stuff in the cloud. Well, that's great. And then the question always becomes, well, which one should I do? Well, that's the portfolio analysis, right? So it provides some guidance.
Right.
A common question is, hey, we started using the cloud and things aren't moving any faster. I thought the cloud was magic. Why is that?
Right.
Well, then you do a path to production analysis to kind of go, okay, what are the bottlenecks in your process? So it's very much the kinds of recommendations and tools, or, I don't want to make it sound like it's just tools, like we just show up and run a tool, but we use these kinds of initiatives within this overall advisory offering to work on the areas that we see as common bottlenecks or common issues. That doesn't mean every organization is exactly the same. I'm not trying to imply that. But these are things that are very common patterns that arise.
Is there typically a cost component? People were concerned about cost overruns. We need to cut costs, or is it not necessarily? It's more like we're ready to spend money. Let's move ahead with this.
Well, I wouldn't say that anybody sort of says, sky's the limit.
Right.
Let me just push all the chips onto 19 red or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
At all.
Yeah.
I'd say that people are often there's commonly a question of like, what will it take for me to get to be, benchmarked against the best of breed in my
Mm.
sector.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of investment will that take?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, where should I make that investment? So sort of coming back to this portfolio, where are places I need to spend and
Mm-hmm.
invest? Where are places that I can maintain or even reduce?
Mm.
Um, and then there's um, a sort of a second order effect oftentimes when people move into the cloud environments, they start finding that they're not really certain why their application costs or how much it costs, or are they spending that wisely,
Right.
or are they getting full value for it? And that's a common thing. And
Mm.
typically, the way that one addresses that is back to this: how do I need to transform my application practices to build these more complex yet more flexible application architectures,
Mm-hmm.
so that if there's a lot of demand, my thing could scale up. But when demand drops off, the flash sale is over or the 4th of
Mm-hmm.
July promotion is done, I can scale it back down. The old model of applications was presumed a very static environment.
Right.
And, you know, and typically you'd buy for the peak. And that was always very wasteful, but that was just what you had to do.
Right.
In the cloud, buying for the peak is very expensive because you're paying on an ongoing basis. And so it's important to tune your application architectures and your operations practices to track the resource consumption according to the application load.
Mm-hmm. If you we're talking to an executive and he or she said, hey, uh, where is this going a few years in the future? How could we, and this may be always what you're speaking about, but I mean, where is this going a few years in the future? How can I get ready for this now? And what's it going to look like in the year 2025? And what do I need to be doing to be getting ready for the future right now? What would be a typical piece of advice you might give?
Well, it's kind of like the saying about the best time to have planted a tree was 20 years ago, and
Right.
the next best time is today.
Okay.
And
Sure.
I think you know I definitely don't want to portray the pandemic as a good thing. I mean, it's a
Sure.
terrible disease, had terrible stuff, terrible impact on people, terrible. But one thing these kinds of crises do is they act as a forcing function
Right.
for change and oftentimes innovation. And so I think anyone who looks at what we've just gone through can sort of say the world and the economy, our society, is maybe not going to be dealing with a pandemic, fingers crossed, but
Right.
we'll be dealing with rapidly changing marketplace conditions,
Totally.
circumstances.
Right.
And so, you know, what we say is, okay, it would have been great if you'd, sort of said, the world's going to change a lot. I better get started 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The next best time to do it is I better start today,
Right.
because the
Right.
world's, this is what I would say, at least, is the world's not going to settle down. It's not going to
Right.
somehow go back to something really stable and static. The world
No.
is likely to remain this way. Almost every industry you look at is undergoing very significant changes.
Mm-hmm.
Entertainment, you know, streaming is like is not only the way that people consume it, so that's a big change, but also
Sure.
that's having impacts in the way things are, movies get decided and so forth. So there's huge impacts throughout the entire
Absolutely.
stack of media.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with medicine, same thing with manufacturing. Same thing. So you know, my advice is, if you've just looked at what's just happened over the last couple of years, expect that going forward,
Right.
and you know, plant the tree today.
Hmm. Expect the unexpected and get yourself in motion. Start today. Bernard, I think you said it. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, James, thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed our conversation.